The vampire king's kidney pulsed with ancient power the moment it settled into her body. Her surgeon dropped his scalpel when her eyes flashed gold on the operating table. Until that moment, no one realized that receiving a vampire's organ meant inheriting their immortal hunger, and the king would stop at nothing to reclaim what was stolen from him. Maya Chen's hands trembled as she sutured the third trauma patient of her 16-hour shift. The fluorescent lights of Metro General's trauma bay buzzing overhead like angry wasps. The coffee had stopped working hours ago, her body running on pure adrenaline and muscle memory as she navigated another gunshot wound with practiced precision. The kidney pain had been gnawing at her for weeks, a dull ache that flared into sharp agony whenever she bent over the operating table, but there was no time to stop, not when lives hung in the balance with each decision she made. She pressed her hand against her lower back, feeling the familiar burn spread through her abdomen like molten metal, and forced herself to focus on the patient beneath her gloved fingers. The young man's pulse was weak but steady, his breathing shallow as she worked to repair the damage to his liver, each stitch a small victory against the chaos that flooded through the hospital's doors every night. But then the world tilted sideways, the surgical instruments clattering to the floor as Maya's vision blurred into fragments of light and shadow. Her knees buckled, sending her crashing into the metal instrument tray, the sound echoing through the trauma bay like a gunshot. The last thing she remembered was Dr. Marcus Webb's voice cutting through the sudden silence, sharp with authority and fear as he barked orders to the nursing staff who scrambled to catch her falling body. Maya's consciousness returned in pieces, floating up from darkness like bubbles rising through black water. The steady beep of monitors anchored her to the present, each electronic pulse a lifeline pulling her back to awareness. Her throat felt raw, her mouth dry as cotton, but it was the strange emptiness in her abdomen that made her press her fingers against the surgical bandages covering her side. Dr. Webb's weathered face swam into focus above her, his usually steady hands shaking slightly as he adjusted her IV drip. She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper that sounded foreign to her own ears. "Your kidneys were shutting down," Webb said, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years as her mentor and friend. "Complete renal failure, toxin levels off the charts. We had maybe an hour before it became irreversible." Maya's mind struggled to process the words, her medical training warring with the surreal experience of being on the wrong side of a diagnosis. Webb's eyes held secrets as he explained how a perfect match organ had appeared in the donor registry at exactly the right moment. The paperwork pristine but somehow lacking the usual chain of custody, documentation. The surgery had been flawless, he assured her, though something in his expression suggested otherwise. The kidney had integrated beautifully, function restored immediately. But there had been complications during the procedure that he couldn't quite explain. The first sign that something fundamental had changed came when Maya tried to sit up in the recovery bed. The room exploded into sensory chaos that threatened to overwhelm her completely. Every sound amplified into crystal clarity, from the whispered conversation between nurses 3 rooms away to the rapid heartbeat of a patient down the hall whose pulse stammered with fear. The fluorescent lights buzzed with electrical energy she could actually feel against her skin, while the antiseptic smell of the hospital mixed with dozens of other scents that painted vivid pictures in her mind. She could smell the metallic tang of blood from the trauma bay, the nervous sweat of medical students, even the subtle pheromones of attraction between 2 orderlies near the elevator. Her reflection in the bedside mirror flickered like a television with poor reception, sometimes showing her familiar face and sometimes revealing empty space where she should have been. Maya reached out to touch the glass, her fingers trembling as they met cold surface instead of the reflection that should have been there. The kidney pulsed beneath her ribs with a rhythm that didn't match her heartbeat, as if it carried its own ancient clockwork within her body. The hunger struck her 3 days after the surgery, a gnawing emptiness that food couldn't touch. Maya stood beside the bed of Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman dying from complications after routine surgery, watching the monitors track her patient's failing vital signs. Something deep within Maya's chest pulled her forward, guiding her hand to rest gently on the woman's forehead. The moment her skin made contact, energy flowed between them like electricity finding ground. Mrs. Rodriguez's color improved dramatically, her breathing deepened, and her heart rate strengthened to normal rhythms, while Maya felt a rush of vitality that left her dizzy with its intensity. The woman's eyes fluttered open, clear and alert for the first time in days, but Maya stumbled backward in horror at what she had done. The security cameras had caught everything, Elena Vasquez told her later, playing back footage that showed Maya's eyes blazing with golden light as she performed what could only be called a miracle. Elena's dark eyes missed nothing as she studied Maya's face, looking for explanations that medical science couldn't provide. The head of hospital security had seen enough unusual incidents in her 15-year career to recognize when something defied natural law, but this was beyond anything in her experience. Maya threw herself into research, spending sleepless nights in the hospital's medical library, searching for any explanation for her condition. The donor registry. Records led nowhere. The kidney's source listed simply as an anonymous donation, with perfect tissue compatibility but no identifying information. Every database search hit dead ends, as if the organ had materialized from thin air with just enough paperwork to pass initial inspection. But the dreams told a different story, vivid nightmares that felt more like memories bleeding through from someone else's experiences. She saw medieval battlefields soaked with blood under starless skies, throne rooms where pale figures in ancient clothing debated matters of life and death, and always a dark silhouette watching from shadows with eyes that burned like golden coins. The figure called to her across centuries of time and space, his voice echoing through her sleep with words she couldn't quite understand, but somehow knew were meant for her ears alone. Maya would wake with the taste of copper in her mouth and the certainty that somewhere in the city, something ancient and powerful was searching for what it had lost. The pull grew stronger each day, a magnetic force that tugged at the kidney nestled beneath her ribs. Maya found herself drawn to certain parts of the hospital, particularly the older sections where the architecture spoke of decades past. The sensation was strongest near windows facing east, toward the wealthy hills outside the city where old mansions stood hidden behind walls and gates. She began to understand that the kidney wasn't just keeping her alive, but actively seeking its origin point, like a compass needle pointing toward magnetic north. During her rounds, Maya discovered she could sense the flow of life force in everyone around her, seeing the bright flames of health and the dimming embers of illness as clearly as reading medical charts. Patients responded to her presence with remarkable improvements, their bodies somehow drawing strength from her proximity, even when she fought to control the energy that wanted to flow from her hands. Dr. Webb watched her with growing concern, noting recoveries that shouldn't have been possible and test results that defied medical explanation. Maya knew he suspected something beyond normal post-surgical complications, but how could she explain that she was becoming something that medical textbooks insisted couldn't exist? The transformation accelerated with each passing night, Maya's body adapting to changes that should have been impossible. Her temperature dropped to levels that would indicate hypothermia in any normal patient, yet she felt more energetic than ever before. Sleep became optional rather than necessary, her body sustained by the life force she unconsciously absorbed from her surroundings. The mirror in her apartment showed her reflection only sporadically now, as if she was phasing in and out of normal reality. Maya began to avoid her colleagues' questions about her remarkable recovery, deflecting their medical curiosity with carefully crafted explanations that skirted the edges of truth. But Elena Vasquez wasn't so easily fooled, her security footage showing anomalies that grew more pronounced each day. The cameras caught Maya's eyes glowing during patient interactions, her movements sometimes too fast for normal recording speeds to capture clearly, and most disturbing of all, the complete absence of her reflection in mirrors throughout the hospital. Elena kept her discoveries private for now, but Maya could feel the weight of scrutiny building around her like gathering storm clouds. Whatever had been done to her during that surgery was far from finished, and the kidney's original owner was getting closer to finding what belonged to him. Maya stood at her apartment window that night, looking out toward the hills where ancient eyes watched the city below, knowing that her old life as simply Dr. Maya Chen had ended the moment that mysterious organ began beating within her chest, and whatever came next would test every limit of her courage and humanity. In the depths of his sprawling estate, 15 miles beyond the city limits, Kieran Blackthorne stirred from the healing stasis that had held him suspended between life and death for 3 weeks. The ornate chamber where he lay resembled more a tomb than a bedroom, carved from black marble and lined with silver inlays that caught the moonlight streaming through stained glass windows, depicting scenes of ancient battles. His body bore the fresh scars of combat against the Ravenclaw clan, deep wounds that had taken him to the very edge of his immortal existence and required the surgical removal of his damaged kidney to save his life. Victor, his seneschal for the past 2 centuries, had assured him the organ would be disposed of properly through their network of human contacts in the medical field, incinerated beyond any possibility of causing complications. But as consciousness returned to Kieran's ancient mind, he felt something that should have been impossible, a pulsing connection to his missing organ that grew stronger with each passing moment. The kidney lived still, not merely preserved, but actively functioning within another's body, its vampire essence spreading through human blood vessels like ink dissolving in clear water. Kieran's golden eyes snapped open fully for the first time since the surgery, his enhanced senses immediately detecting the catastrophic magnitude of Victor's failure. Somewhere in the city below, a human was transforming into something that had never existed before, a hybrid creature that possessed all the power of vampiric immortality without the ancient restraints and blood bonds that kept his kind in check. The realization sent waves of fury and fear through Kieran's consciousness as he forced his still healing body upright in the marble chamber. 800 years of existence had taught him that the most dangerous creatures were often those who had never learned the weight of their power, and a human with vampire organs would have no understanding of the forces now coursing through their mortal frame. Victor materialized in the doorway as if summoned by his master's awakening rage, his pale face immediately showing comprehension of his terrible mistake. "My lord, I thought the human medical protocols would ensure complete destruction of the organ," Victor stammered, his voice carrying centuries of loyalty that could not quite mask his growing terror. But Kieran's blood-bound tracking ability was already reaching across the distance between his estate and the city, following the invisible thread that connected him to his missing kidney like a spider sensing vibrations in its web. The organ pulsed with life and power, integrated completely into its new host's circulatory system and actively transforming human cells into something altogether unprecedented. Through the connection, Kieran could sense the growing strength of the hybrid, feel their enhanced senses awakening and their hunger for life force beginning to manifest in ways that would soon attract the attention of every supernatural power in the region. The Council of Shadows would consider such a creature an abomination to be destroyed immediately, while rival vampire clans would see it as either a threat to eliminate or a weapon to be captured and controlled. Kieran rose from the healing chamber with movements that spoke of barely contained violence, his tall frame draped in shadows that seemed to move independently of the moonlight streaming through the windows. The house guard assembled at his mental summons, 20 vampires bound to him by blood oaths that transcended death itself, each one a warrior who had served him through centuries of supernatural conflicts. Captain Lucian stepped forward first, his scarred face bearing witness to countless battles fought in Kieran's name, his silver armor gleaming with protective runes carved by ancient craftsmen. The situation required immediate action, but also delicate precision, for the hybrid represented both an unprecedented danger and an opportunity that could reshape the balance of power in the supernatural world. Through the kidney's connection, Kieran could feel the hybrid's location with pinpoint accuracy, their life force blazing like a beacon in his enhanced perception as they moved through the corridors of Metro General Hospital. Their power was growing exponentially, each day bringing new abilities and deeper transformation that would soon make retrieval impossible without causing a supernatural war that would expose their hidden world to human authorities. Victor provided additional intelligence gathered through their network of human contacts, describing anomalous medical records and security footage that showed impossible healing abilities and energy manifestations that defied natural law. The hybrid's transformation was proceeding faster than any of Kieran's advisors had thought possible, their human physiology apparently providing an ideal foundation for vampiric enhancement rather than rejecting it as conventional wisdom suggested. Ancient texts spoke of such hybrids in purely theoretical terms, warning that creatures combining human adaptability with vampire power could potentially surpass their pureblood creators in both strength and cunning. Kieran felt a mixture of professional fascination and existential dread as he considered the implications of what Victor's mistake had unleashed upon the world. The hybrid would need guidance to control their emerging abilities, but they would also pose a threat to every established supernatural authority if left to develop their powers without proper restraint. Through the blood connection, Kieran sensed moments of the hybrid's consciousness, brief flashes of medical knowledge and healing instincts that suggested they were using their new abilities to save human lives rather than feed upon them. This compassionate application of vampire power was perhaps more dangerous than any predatory instinct, for it would make the hybrid sympathetic to other supernatural beings who might seek to exploit their unique nature. As dawn approached, Kieran coordinated his forces for a carefully planned retrieval operation that would avoid exposing the supernatural world to human scrutiny. The hospital where the hybrid worked provided both opportunity and complication, offering cover for supernatural activity while also placing innocent humans in potential danger if the confrontation went badly. Captain Lucian would lead a reconnaissance team to observe the hybrid's patterns and capabilities, while Victor worked through their human contacts to manipulate hospital records and security systems. Kieran himself would make the initial approach, using the blood connection to communicate directly with the hybrid's consciousness and attempt diplomatic resolution before resorting to force. But even as he planned the operation, Kieran felt the kidney's influence growing stronger within its new host, their vampire nature asserting itself in ways that would soon be impossible to hide from human medical professionals. The transformation was approaching a critical threshold beyond which the hybrid would become a permanent fixture in the supernatural landscape, their existence certain to trigger responses from every faction that valued the ancient balance of power. Meanwhile, across the city at Metro General Hospital, Maya Chen stood in the staff locker room, staring at the digital thermometer that registered her body temperature at precisely 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Sarah Kim watched from beside the lockers with growing concern etched across her features, her medical training warring with the impossible evidence of her best friend's condition. Maya deflected Sarah's questions with carefully constructed explanations about post-surgical complications and medication side effects, but she could see the doubt growing in her friend's dark eyes. The hunger that had plagued her for days was evolving into something more sophisticated, her body no longer craving food, but instead sustaining itself on the ambient life energy that flowed through the hospital like an invisible river. During her rounds, Maya found herself unconsciously drawing strength from the emotional resonance of recovery and healing, her presence somehow accelerating patient recoveries in ways that defied medical explanation. The nursing staff had begun to comment on the unusual number of miraculous improvements occurring during Maya's shifts, their casual observations threatening to attract the kind of administrative attention that would lead to formal investigation. The defining moment came during a late-night emergency when paramedics rushed in a teenage boy who had been critically injured in a car accident. Maya saw the extent of his internal injuries with supernatural clarity, her enhanced senses revealing damage that would require hours of surgery and might still result in permanent disability or death. Without conscious thought, she placed her hands on the boy's chest and felt the familiar flow of energy between them. But this time, something different happened. Instead of simply transferring life force, Maya found herself absorbing the boy's pain and trauma into her own body, feeling his shattered ribs and punctured lung as if they were her own injuries. The sensation was agony beyond anything she had experienced, but she held the connection until his breathing stabilized and his vital signs returned to normal ranges. Then, with concentration born of desperate need, Maya channeled her enhanced healing abilities to repair the damage she had taken upon herself, watching in amazement as her bones knitted together and her internal bleeding stopped within minutes. The boy would wake up sore but whole, while security cameras captured footage of Maya's eyes blazing with golden light during the impossible procedure. Elena Vasquez reviewed the surveillance footage in her security office with the methodical attention of someone who had spent decades learning to spot anomalies in human behavior. The energy readings around Maya had been spiking consistently since her surgery, electromagnetic fluctuations that suggested the presence of technology or phenomena beyond normal hospital equipment. Elena's investigation had uncovered a pattern of unusual incidents dating back to Maya's first day of recovery, each event characterized by impossible medical outcomes and energy signatures that her equipment couldn't properly classify. The head of security had seen enough unexplained phenomena in her career to recognize when something defied natural law. But Maya's case went beyond simple anomaly into territory that challenged her understanding of reality itself. Elena began documenting everything with the precision of someone who knew that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, building a file that would either vindicate her suspicions or mark her as someone who had finally seen too much. As Maya's transformation deepened, she began experiencing what she could only describe as memory bleeds, vivid flashes of experiences that belonged to someone else entirely. She saw throne rooms carved from black stone where pale figures in ancient clothing debated matters of law and territory, their discussions conducted with the formal courtesy of beings who had learned patience through centuries of existence. Medieval battlefields stretched before her inner vision, soaked with blood under starless skies as supernatural warriors clashed with weapons forged in forgotten ages. Most disturbing were the glimpses of political negotiations conducted in modern boardrooms and government offices, ancient vampires manipulating human institutions with the casual expertise of those who had been practicing such influence since before recorded history began. Through these borrowed memories, Maya began to understand the weight of immortal responsibility, the burden of making decisions that would echo through decades or centuries of consequences. The figure who owned these memories remained shadowy but increasingly familiar, his presence growing stronger in her consciousness, as if he were approaching across both physical distance and psychic connection. Maya realized that whoever had provided her kidney was not only still alive, but actively aware of the connection between them, his ancient consciousness reaching across the city to reclaim what had been taken from him. And now's the time to stop and subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these tales travel across the world. Now let's continue. The moment Kieran Blackthorne stepped through the automatic doors of Metro General Hospital's emergency department, Maya felt the kidney beneath her ribs respond with such intensity that she nearly dropped the medical chart in her hands. The organ pulsed with recognition, its rhythm synchronizing with something ancient and powerful that moved through the hospital corridors with predatory grace disguised as human vulnerability. Kieran had chosen his disguise carefully, appearing as a middle-aged businessman suffering from chest pains, his pale complexion and slightly labored breathing suggesting cardiac distress that would require immediate medical attention. But Maya's enhanced senses penetrated the facade instantly, revealing the supernatural aura that clung to him like shadows made manifest, the scent of old power and spilled blood that no amount of human clothing could mask. She watched from the nurse's station as he was processed through triage, noting how other patients unconsciously shifted away from him, despite his unremarkable appearance, their primitive instincts recognizing an apex predator, even when their rational minds saw only another emergency room visitor. The kidney sang within her chest as Kieran's golden eyes met hers across the crowded waiting area. 8 centuries of patience and authority focused on her with laser precision that made her breath catch in her throat. Maya found herself drawn inexorably toward the hospital chapel, a small interfaith sanctuary tucked away on the second floor where patients and families sought solace during medical crises. The room held an atmosphere of accumulated prayer and desperate hope, its neutral spiritual energy providing sanctuary from the electromagnetic chaos of the hospital's medical equipment and the emotional turbulence of human suffering. Kieran was waiting for her there, his businessman disguise abandoned for clothing that seemed to belong to another century, a long black coat that moved like liquid shadow, and boots that made no sound against the chapel's polished floor. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ages, cultured tones shaped by centuries of command and diplomacy that made Maya's enhanced hearing tingle with recognition. The kidney within her chest had never belonged to a normal vampire, she realized, but to something far older and more powerful than she had imagined possible. Kieran explained the situation with clinical precision that matched her own medical training, describing how vampire organs carried not just biological function, but essence, consciousness, and power that would transform any human host into something unprecedented in supernatural history. The choice he offered was stark in its simplicity, but devastating in its implications: return the kidney and retain her humanity, accepting that she would likely die without it, or keep the organ and face the consequences of becoming something that challenged every established law of supernatural existence. Maya felt the familiar surge of healing power that had saved dozens of lives since her transformation. The ability to see disease and injury with perfect clarity and channel life force to repair damage that conventional medicine could never touch. She had witnessed miracles flow through her hands, watched dying patients return to health through her touch, experienced the profound satisfaction of healing in ways that transcended anything she had learned in medical school. The kidney pulsed with agreement at her decision, its ancient power recognizing a worthy host who would use vampiric abilities for preservation rather than destruction. But Kieran's expression remained grave as he warned her about the political ramifications of her choice, explaining how vampire society operated under strict hierarchies and ancient laws that viewed unauthorized hybrids as either threats to be eliminated or weapons to be controlled by competing factions. The supernatural world existed in careful balance, Kieran continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had spent centuries maintaining that equilibrium through diplomacy and strategic violence. The Council of Shadows governed vampire society with absolute authority, their decisions shaped by traditions older than recorded human history and enforced by beings whose power could reshape entire regions if unleashed without restraint. Maya's existence violated fundamental assumptions about the separation between human and vampire nature, her hybrid status threatening to upset alliances and territorial agreements that had kept supernatural conflicts hidden from human authorities for over a millennium. Rival vampire clans would see her as either an opportunity to gain advantage over their enemies or a dangerous variable that needed elimination before she could tip the balance of power in unexpected directions. Werewolf territories and witch covens would have their own perspectives on a creature that combined human adaptability with vampire immortality, while human organizations aware of the supernatural world would view her as either an asset to be recruited or a security breach to be contained. Maya left the chapel with her world fundamentally altered, not just by Kieran's revelations, but by the understanding that her medical calling had become entangled with supernatural politics beyond her comprehension. She threw herself into experimentation with her expanding abilities, learning to consciously control the life force perception that allowed her to diagnose conditions instantly and channel healing energy with surgical precision. During her rounds, Maya discovered she could see the flow of vitality through human bodies, like luminous rivers, bright currents of health and dark stagnant pools where disease had taken root. Her enhanced awareness extended beyond biological systems to include emotional resonance and psychological trauma, painting complete pictures of patient wellness that encompassed mind, body, and spirit in ways conventional medicine never attempted. The power was intoxicating in its scope and terrifying in its implications, each successful healing building her confidence while simultaneously deepening her understanding of how far she had moved beyond normal human limitations. The gas leak would have killed everyone on the third floor if Maya hadn't sensed the chemical signature drifting through the hospital's ventilation system during her late night shift. Her enhanced awareness detected the subtle wrongness in the air composition long before human senses would have registered danger, the odorless poison spreading through patient rooms and nursing stations with deadly efficiency. Maya's urgent call to maintenance triggered an immediate evacuation and emergency response that saved over 40 lives. But the incident also demonstrated capabilities that would inevitably attract investigation from hospital administration and potentially government agencies equipped to handle unusual phenomena. She realized that hiding her abilities was becoming increasingly impossible as their scope and sophistication continued to expand, each demonstration of supernatural capability, creating evidence trails that would eventually lead sophisticated investigators directly to her door. Meanwhile, Dr. Sarah Kim's investigation into Maya's medical files had uncovered inconsistencies that challenged everything she thought she knew about her best friend's surgery and recovery. The transplant documentation contained gaps and alterations that suggested either massive administrative incompetence or deliberate concealment of crucial information about the donated organ's origin and characteristics. Sarah's medical training provided frameworks for understanding surgical procedures and post-operative complications, but Maya's condition defied every category of normal recovery pattern she had studied during her residency and fellowship training. The temperature anomalies alone should have indicated serious infection or metabolic dysfunction, yet Maya displayed energy levels and cognitive function that exceeded her baseline performance from before the kidney failure. Sarah found herself documenting observations that read like science fiction rather than medical case notes, tracking improvements and capabilities that belonged in research papers about theoretical human enhancement rather than routine surgical follow-up reports. Elena Vasquez's security investigation had traced the mysterious kidney back to a private medical transport company that existed only on paper, its corporate registration leading to shell companies and forwarding addresses that created an impenetrable maze of bureaucratic dead ends. The transport vehicle itself had disappeared from all tracking systems immediately after delivering the organ to Metro General, as if it had simply vanished from existence once its mission was complete. Elena's contacts in law enforcement and federal agencies returned puzzled reports about organizations that seemed designed specifically to avoid investigation, their legal structures crafted with expertise that suggested resources and influence far beyond normal medical transport operations. The electromagnetic anomalies around Maya continued to intensify. Energy readings that registered on sensitive equipment, but defied classification according to any known natural or technological phenomena. Dr. Reginald Thorne's approach to Sarah came during a routine hospital board meeting, his distinguished appearance and authoritative manner marking him as someone accustomed to wielding influence behind the scenes of institutional politics. Thorne's warnings about Maya were delivered with the careful precision of someone who understood dangerous information and its potential consequences. His knowledge of supernatural affairs cloaked in medical terminology that skirted the edges of truth without revealing the full scope of what Maya had become. Sarah listened with growing alarm as Thorne described theoretical scenarios involving experimental medical procedures and biological enhancement programs that could explain Maya's impossible recovery without venturing into territory that would sound completely insane to rational medical professionals. But beneath Thorne's carefully chosen words, Sarah detected genuine fear for Maya's safety and urgent concern about forces beyond hospital administration that might take interest in her friend's unique condition. The Council of Shadows emissary arrived without warning or ceremony, materializing in Maya's apartment while she slept with the casual ease of someone accustomed to moving through human security systems without detection. Countess Elizaveta Volkov had survived 6 centuries of vampire politics through a combination of ruthless pragmatism and absolute loyalty to the ancient laws that governed supernatural society, her pale beauty concealing predatory instincts honed by decades of eliminating threats to vampire supremacy. Maya awakened to find the Countess seated in her living room like a statue carved from moonlight and shadow, golden eyes studying her with the detached interest of an entomologist examining an unusual specimen. The vampire's presence filled the apartment with an aura of barely contained violence that made Maya's hybrid instincts scream warnings about predators and territorial disputes that could turn lethal without notice. Elizaveta's message was delivered with diplomatic courtesy that couldn't disguise its underlying menace. The Council of Shadows had unanimously declared Maya's existence an abomination that violated fundamental laws of supernatural order and demanded immediate correction through termination or voluntary dissolution. The Countess explained how Maya's hybrid nature represented an unprecedented threat to the careful balance that kept vampire society hidden from human authorities, her abilities potentially exposing supernatural capabilities to scientific investigation that could lead to systematic persecution of all immortal beings. Maya's protests about using her powers for healing rather than predation were dismissed with aristocratic disdain, Elizaveta pointing out that noble intentions meant nothing when weighed against the survival of an entire species that had existed in secret for millennia. The Council's patience was measured in days rather than weeks, the Countess concluded, and Maya's continued existence after their deadline would result in enforcement actions that would eliminate not only her, but anyone who had aided or protected her transformation. Maya realized that her choice to keep Kieran's kidney had thrust her into a supernatural war that she barely understood, her medical expertise and healing instincts providing no guidance for navigating the lethal politics of immortal beings who measured their conflicts in centuries rather than moments. The apartment felt smaller after Elizaveta's departure, its familiar spaces now seeming exposed and vulnerable to creatures who could move through human security like shadows through candlelight. Maya's enhanced senses detected surveillance from multiple sources, supernatural watchers whose presence registered as subtle distortions in the electromagnetic spectrum and barely perceptible shifts in air pressure that spoke of beings learning her routines and weaknesses. The kidney pulsed within her chest with increasing urgency, its connection to Kieran growing stronger, as if seeking protection from the ancient vampire who had created it through 8 centuries of accumulated power and political influence. Maya understood that her transformation was approaching a crucial threshold where the supernatural world would either accept her existence or move to eliminate her with finality that would make her medical training irrelevant against forces that could reshape reality itself through applications of immortal will and accumulated mystical authority. Countess Elizaveta Volkov descended upon Metro General Hospital like a storm front of aristocratic fury and ancient authority, her presence rippling through the supernatural atmosphere with enough force to make every sensitive creature within 3 city blocks pause in recognition of apex predation. Maya felt the Countess approaching long before she materialized in the trauma bay, the kidney beneath her ribs resonating with harmonics of fear and respect that spoke to 8 centuries of vampire politics and the careful balance of power that kept their hidden world functioning. Elisaveta moved through the hospital corridors with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to navigate human institutions while maintaining perfect supernatural composure. Her designer clothing and medical consultant credentials providing flawless camouflage for a creature whose true age predated the founding of most modern nations. But Maya's enhanced senses penetrated the elegant facade instantly, revealing the predatory aura that marked Elisaveta as something far more dangerous than any human authority figure, her golden eyes holding depths of accumulated violence that made Maya's hybrid instincts scream warnings about territorial disputes that could turn lethal without provocation. The mass casualty event began as a construction crane collapse that sent tons of twisted metal crashing into a crowded sidewalk during the evening rush hour, creating injuries so severe and numerous that every available medical professional was called to emergency stations. Maya found herself working alongside trauma teams to treat victims whose conditions ranged from superficial cuts to catastrophic internal damage that would normally require hours of surgery and might still result in permanent disability or death. But with Elisaveta watching from the gallery above the trauma bays, Maya made a decision that would forever alter her relationship with the supernatural world. She opened herself completely to the hybrid abilities that had been growing within her since the transplant, allowing her enhanced perception to assess every victim simultaneously while channeling healing energy through her hands with surgical precision that defied conventional medical understanding. Broken bones knitted together under her touch, internal bleeding stopped within moments of contact, and traumatic brain injuries resolved as Maya absorbed damage into her own enhanced physiology, before healing it instantaneously through vampiric regeneration. Elisaveta observed the impossible display of medical intervention with the cold analytical precision of someone who had spent centuries evaluating threats to vampire supremacy, her ancient mind calculating the implications of Maya's abilities for the careful balance that kept supernatural society hidden from human investigation. The Countess recognized immediately that Maya represented something unprecedented in vampire history, a hybrid creature whose compassionate application of immortal power could either revolutionize supernatural medicine or expose their entire species to scientific scrutiny that would lead to systematic persecution. Each miraculous healing Maya performed was documented by hospital security cameras and witnessed by medical professionals whose training provided no framework for understanding what they had observed, creating evidence trails that sophisticated investigators could follow directly to conclusions about non-human capabilities existing within their institutions. When Kieran arrived in response to the psychic disturbance that Maya's massive healing effort had created across the supernatural community, he found Elisaveta waiting in his private study with the patient composure of someone delivering an ultimatum that would reshape the political landscape of their immortal society. The Countess had served as the Council's primary enforcer for over 2 centuries, her reputation built on absolute loyalty to vampire law and ruthless efficiency in eliminating threats that could not be contained through diplomacy or intimidation. Elisaveta's challenge to Kieran's authority was delivered with aristocratic courtesy that couldn't disguise its fundamental nature as a declaration of war between competing visions of supernatural governance. The Council viewed Maya's hybrid existence as the direct result of Kieran's negligence in allowing his kidney to enter human medical systems, a catastrophic breach of security that demonstrated unfitness for the leadership responsibilities that came with ruling one of the most powerful vampire houses in North America. The political mathematics were stark in their simplicity, Elisaveta explained with the detached precision of someone who had participated in similar calculations countless times throughout her immortal existence. Either Maya would be destroyed immediately to prevent further exposure of vampire capabilities to human investigation, or the Council would declare Kieran's leadership forfeit, and install a replacement ruler who understood the necessity of maintaining absolute separation between supernatural and human affairs. Kieran's 8 centuries of accumulated political capital and military strength meant that deposing him would require a civil war that could destabilize vampire society across multiple continents. But the Council's collective authority represented an even greater concentration of power that had maintained supernatural order since before recorded human history began. Maya's continued existence threatened to trigger conflicts that could reshape the hidden world in ways that none of the ancient powers could fully predict or control. Maya overheard enough of the supernatural politics surrounding her existence to understand that she had become a pawn in conflicts that measured their timelines in decades rather than moments, her hybrid nature representing an unprecedented variable that challenged assumptions about vampire supremacy and human limitation that had guided immortal society for over a millennium. The realization that powerful beings were debating her fate as if she were a mathematical problem to be solved rather than a person with agency and rights filled Maya with rage that resonated through the kidney's connection to Kieran with enough force to make the ancient vampire pause in his negotiations with Elizaveta. Sarah and Elena had begun working together to protect Maya, despite their incomplete understanding of what they were fighting against, their human perspectives providing insights into hospital security and administrative vulnerabilities that supernatural beings might overlook in their focus on immortal politics and territorial disputes. The organ connection between Maya and Kieran deepened with each passing day, their shared circulatory system creating psychic bridges that allowed them to experience fragments of each other's thoughts and emotions with startling clarity. Through their mystical bond, Maya felt the crushing weight of Kieran's immortal loneliness, 8 centuries of ruling from isolation and making decisions that cost lives, but preserved the greater supernatural community from exposure and persecution. She experienced his memories of watching human civilizations rise and fall while maintaining the careful balance that kept vampire society hidden in shadows. The accumulated grief of outliving countless generations of mortals who had briefly touched his existence before aging into dust and memory. Kieran's perspective on immortality was shaped by responsibility rather than predation. His ancient consciousness focused on preservation and protection rather than the parasitic relationship that most humans imagined when they thought about vampire nature. Meanwhile, Kieran gained access to Maya's compassionate dedication to healing, her medical training and hybrid abilities combining to create something unprecedented in his centuries of experience with supernatural transformation. He felt her genuine horror at the thought of using vampire power for predation rather than preservation, her instinctive drive to channel immortal capabilities toward saving lives rather than extending her own existence through the consumption of others. The kidney had chosen its host well, Kieran realized, finding someone whose moral framework could handle vampire power without being corrupted by the darker impulses that often accompanied supernatural transformation. Maya's hybrid nature represented not an abomination, but an evolution, a new form of vampire existence that could bridge the gap between supernatural and human societies in ways that traditional immortals had never attempted. Victor's betrayal came as a shock that reverberated through Kieran's consciousness like a physical blow, 2 centuries of loyalty and shared purpose shattered by the Seneschal's secret communications with council agents, who promised him advancement in exchange for ensuring Maya's destruction. Victor had arranged for the kidney's disposal through human medical channels specifically to create the crisis that would justify removing Kieran from power, his seemingly innocent mistake revealed as calculated treachery designed to elevate his own position within vampire hierarchy. The Seneschal's access to house security systems and knowledge of Kieran's protective strategies made him uniquely positioned to sabotage any attempts to defend Maya from council enforcement actions, his betrayal representing a fundamental breach of the blood bonds that held vampire society together through mutual trust and shared consequences. The attack on Sarah came without warning as she left the hospital after a particularly difficult shift, council agents moving with supernatural speed and precision to eliminate the human who had gathered too much information about Maya's impossible abilities. But Maya's enhanced senses detected the threat through the psychic disturbance that violence created in the supernatural atmosphere, her hybrid instincts driving her across the city with speed that left streaks of golden light in her wake. She arrived to find Sarah cornered in the hospital parking garage by three vampires whose pale faces showed the aristocratic features and ancient eyes that marked them as council operatives trained in elimination techniques that left no evidence for human authorities to investigate. Maya's first kill was accomplished with efficiency that terrified her more than the violence itself, her hybrid strength allowing her to tear through vampire physiology with brutal effectiveness, while her medical knowledge guided her attacks toward vulnerabilities that would cause maximum damage with minimal effort. The darker vampire instincts that had been growing within her since the transformation awakened fully during the combat, her consciousness flooding with predatory satisfaction and territorial fury that felt as natural as breathing, despite contradicting everything she believed about her own moral nature. Sarah watched in horrified fascination as her best friend moved with inhuman speed and precision, golden eyes blazing with power that belonged in ancient legends rather than modern medical facilities. Kieran arrived to find Maya standing over the bodies of council operatives, her surgical scrubs stained with vampire blood that glowed faintly in the fluorescent lighting of the parking garage. Her eyes had settled into permanent gold that no longer flickered between human and supernatural states, the transformation reaching a threshold beyond which her hybrid nature would become an irreversible part of her fundamental identity. Maya looked up at him with expression that combined satisfaction at protecting her friend with horror at how easily violence had come to her enhanced capabilities. The kidney's influence now strong enough to affect her emotional responses and moral calculations in ways that changed her essential character. Kieran recognized the signs of accelerating vampire transformation, the psychological shifts that accompanied the integration of immortal power into human consciousness, and realized that Maya was approaching the point where she would need to choose between embracing her hybrid nature completely or losing herself to the conflicting impulses that were reshaping her identity. The Council's ultimatum had forced events beyond the possibility of peaceful resolution, supernatural politics and human compassion colliding in ways that would require solutions unprecedented in 8 centuries of vampire governance and territorial management. Sarah stared at both of them with expression that showed her growing understanding that her best friend had become something beyond human limitation. While Elena's security cameras captured footage that would either be dismissed as sophisticated special effects or trigger investigations that could expose the entire supernatural community to scientific scrutiny and government intervention that had been avoided through careful concealment for over a millennium of coexistence between human and immortal societies. The emergency gathering convened in the abandoned cathedral on the outskirts of the city, its Gothic architecture providing neutral ground where ancient supernatural powers could meet without triggering territorial disputes or violating centuries-old treaties that governed interaction between competing immortal factions. Kieran had called upon every major supernatural leader within 500 miles, his message carried through mystical channels and blood-bond communications that transcended normal diplomatic protocols in their urgency and gravity. Maya stood beside him in the cathedral's central nave, her hybrid presence causing ripples of unease among creatures who had never encountered anything like her unique combination of human compassion and vampire power. Her golden eyes reflecting candlelight that seemed to burn with inner fire rather than external illumination. The assembled supernatural community represented a cross-section of hidden societies that most humans never imagined existed within their modern world, ancient bloodlines and mystical traditions that had shaped history from shadows while maintaining careful separation from mortal affairs through diplomacy, intimidation, and selective violence when necessary to preserve their secret existence. Lord Aldrich Ravencrest entered the cathedral with the fluid grace that marked him as alpha of the largest werewolf territory on the eastern seaboard, his human form barely containing the predatory power that had made him legendary among shapeshifter communities for his ability to unite competing packs under single leadership. Aldrich's support for Maya came not from sentiment, but from strategic calculation that recognized her hybrid abilities as potentially valuable for treating supernatural injuries and diseases that normal medicine could never address, his pragmatic mind seeing opportunities for alliance that could benefit werewolf society in ways that traditional vampire relationships never could. High Witch Morgana Ashcroft materialized from shadow and starlight with the dramatic flair that centuries of mystical practice had taught her to wield like a weapon, her ancient eyes immediately focusing on Maya, with recognition that sent shivers through every supernatural being present. Morgana spoke of prophecies older than recorded history that described the coming of a healer who would walk between worlds, bridging the gap between mortal and immortal existence through abilities that belonged fully to neither realm, but drew power from both in unprecedented combinations. Countess Elizaveta Volkov represented the Council of Shadows with aristocratic authority that brooked no compromise or negotiation, her presence filling the cathedral with an aura of absolute judgment that had been honed through centuries of enforcing vampire law without mercy or exception. The Council's position remained unchanged despite the gathering of supernatural powers. Maya represented an unprecedented threat to the careful balance that kept vampire society hidden from human investigation, and her continued existence would inevitably lead to exposure and persecution that could destroy millennia of accumulated power and influence. Elizaveta dismissed Maya's proposals for serving as a bridge between human and vampire worlds as naive idealism that failed to account for the fundamental incompatibility between mortal medicine and immortal politics. Her ancient perspective shaped by witnessing countless attempts at cooperation between species that ended in betrayal, exploitation, and warfare. Maya refused to be discussed, as if she were property to be disposed of, according to the convenience of supernatural politics. Her medical training and hybrid instincts combining to give her confidence that defied the accumulated authority of beings who had ruled their respective domains for centuries or millennia. She proposed creating a new role within supernatural society, using her unique abilities to provide medical services that could benefit all immortal communities while maintaining the secrecy that protected them from human interference. Maya's vision included establishing treatment facilities that could handle supernatural injuries and diseases without exposing patients to human medical systems that lacked frameworks for understanding non-mortal physiology. Her hybrid perspective allowing her to see possibilities that pure-blood vampires and other immortal beings might overlook due to their separation from modern human technology and medical advancement. The debate that followed revealed fractures within supernatural society that had been hidden beneath diplomatic courtesy and ancient treaties, competing visions of how immortal communities should interact with the rapidly evolving human world of the 21st century. Younger supernatural beings saw Maya as representing evolution and adaptation that could strengthen their positions in a world where human technology increasingly threatened traditional methods of concealment and influence. While ancient powers viewed her hybrid nature as contamination that weakened the purity of bloodlines and mystical traditions that had sustained their communities through millennia of careful isolation. Werewolf territories had always maintained closer relationships with human societies than vampire courts, their shapeshifter nature requiring more flexible approaches to concealment and integration, making Aldrich's support for Maya strategically logical despite the political risks of opposing council authority. Morgana's mystical perspective added layers of prophetic significance that transformed the discussion from immediate politics to cosmic destiny. Her witch sight revealing patterns of fate and magical resonance that suggested Maya's emergence was part of larger supernatural changes that would reshape the hidden world regardless of council preferences or traditional vampire authority. The ancient prophecies spoke of a time when the boundaries between mortal and immortal realms would thin, requiring new forms of leadership that could navigate both worlds with equal skill and understanding. And Maya's hybrid abilities seemed designed specifically to fulfill such requirements. But prophecy and political reality often conflicted in supernatural affairs, and the Council's commitment to maintaining traditional power structures made them hostile to changes that could undermine their carefully cultivated supremacy over vampire society and its relationships with other immortal communities. When negotiations reached an impasse that threatened to trigger the supernatural civil war that everyone present desperately wanted to avoid, Maya made a decision that stunned the assembled powers with its boldness and strategic brilliance. She invoked ancient supernatural law that allowed any being to challenge council authority through single combat, winner taking all in a trial that would settle her right to exist according to traditions older than recorded history. Elisaveta accepted the challenge with predatory satisfaction that revealed her confidence in centuries of combat experience and vampire powers that had made her the Council's most feared enforcer. Her aristocratic composure, masking anticipation for violence that would finally resolve the hybrid problem through methods that vampire society understood and respected. The supernatural community gathered to witness what many believed would be the shortest trial by combat in immortal history, a 600-year-old vampire warrior whose reputation had been built on eliminating threats to council authority, facing a newly transformed hybrid whose medical training provided no preparation for life or death supernatural combat. The abandoned cathedral became an arena where ancient laws would determine the future of supernatural society, its Gothic arches and stained glass windows providing dramatic backdrop for a confrontation that would either validate Maya's right to exist or demonstrate the futility of challenging traditions that had maintained vampire supremacy for millennia. Elisaveta moved with fluid grace that spoke of centuries spent perfecting combat techniques that combined supernatural speed and strength with strategic intelligence honed through countless battles against rivals who had underestimated her aristocratic appearance and diplomatic manner. Maya's approach to the combat revealed the unique advantages of her hybrid nature, her medical knowledge allowing her to analyze Elisaveta's movements for signs of old injuries and physiological vulnerabilities, while her enhanced healing provided resilience that pure-blood vampires couldn't match without access to external blood sources. The kidney's power manifested in ways that surprised even Kieran, allowing Maya to absorb and redirect Elisaveta's attacks, rather than simply enduring them, her hybrid physiology, adapting to supernatural violence, with efficiency that suggested evolutionary advantages of combining human and vampire characteristics. Each exchange of blows became a medical examination, as Maya's enhanced senses revealed the accumulated damage that centuries of warfare had inflicted on Elisaveta's body. Old wounds that had healed imperfectly, and chronic pain that the Countess had endured for so long that she no longer consciously acknowledged its constant presence. The decisive moment came not through superior violence, but through an act of healing that demonstrated Maya's unique value to supernatural society in ways that pure destruction never could. Instead of delivering a killing blow when Elisaveta stumbled from the accumulated damage of their combat, Maya channeled her hybrid abilities to repair the ancient injuries that had been compromising the Countess's fighting effectiveness for centuries, her healing touch addressing bone fractures and muscle tears that had never properly recovered from battles fought decades or centuries in the past. Elisaveta experienced freedom from chronic pain, for the first time since the medieval conflicts that had established her reputation as the Council's premier enforcer, her aristocratic composure cracking as she realized that Maya represented possibilities for supernatural medicine that traditional vampire society had never imagined or attempted to develop. The transformation in Elisaveta's perspective was as dramatic as Maya's original hybrid conversion, centuries of rigid adherence to council authority giving way to recognition that the hybrid represented evolution rather than contamination, advancement rather than threat to vampire supremacy. The Countess became Maya's unexpected advocate in the political negotiations that followed the trial by combat, her testimony carrying weight with council members who had respected her judgment and loyalty for over 2 centuries of faithful service to vampire law and tradition. The assembled supernatural community witnessed something unprecedented in their hidden history, a resolution achieved through healing rather than violence, cooperation rather than dominance, possibilities rather than limitations imposed by ancient prejudices and territorial thinking. The Council's grudging acceptance of Maya's existence came with strict conditions that reflected their continued concerns about exposure and their determination to maintain ultimate authority over supernatural affairs. But the precedent had been established that hybrid beings could earn recognition through demonstrated value rather than being automatically eliminated as threats to traditional power structures. Maya's right to exist was now legally established according to supernatural law, but her future role in immortal society would depend on her ability to navigate political complexities that made human hospital administration seem simple by comparison. Kieran watched the proceedings with mixture of relief and apprehension, understanding that Maya's victory had solved the immediate crisis while creating new challenges that would require careful management to avoid triggering the conflicts they had sought to prevent through diplomatic resolution and ancient legal traditions. The cathedral emptied slowly as supernatural leaders departed to inform their respective communities about the unprecedented resolution and its implications for future relationships between immortal societies and the evolving human world. But Maya remained behind with Kieran and her newfound allies to begin planning the integration that her hybrid abilities had made possible. Elizaveta approached them with expression that combined aristocratic dignity with genuine curiosity about medical techniques that could address supernatural conditions that vampire society had simply endured for centuries without seeking solutions through cooperation with human knowledge and technology. The Countess's support would prove crucial in the political maneuvering that lay ahead, her influence with council members providing protection for Maya's experimental approaches to supernatural medicine, while her combat reputation discouraged challenges from vampire factions that might view hybrid integration as weakness rather than strength. Maya's victory in the trial by combat had established her right to exist within supernatural society, but the greater challenge of building bridges between human and immortal communities would require skills that went far beyond medical training and hybrid abilities, diplomatic finesse and political understanding that would test every aspect of her character and determination in the complex negotiations that would determine whether her vision of cooperation could overcome millennia of separation and mistrust between worlds that had evolved in isolation from each other. Maya's new medical practice took shape in the renovated wing of an abandoned hospital on the city's outskirts, its Art Deco architecture providing both the spacious facilities needed for supernatural medical procedures and the isolation required to maintain secrecy from human authorities who might ask uncomfortable questions about patient records that defied conventional understanding of biology and recovery rates. The facility combined cutting-edge human medical technology with mystical enhancements that Kieran's resources and Morgana's magical expertise had woven into every system, creating treatment rooms where vampire physiology could be monitored alongside human patients whose conditions required the unique perspective that only Maya's hybrid abilities could provide. Sarah had resigned from Metro General to join Maya's revolutionary medical practice, her conventional training proving invaluable for developing protocols that could bridge the gap between human medicine and supernatural healing techniques that operated according to principles that most medical schools had never imagined or attempted to codify into systematic approaches. Elena's security expertise became the foundation for protecting both supernatural patients who needed treatment without exposure to human medical databases and human patients whose conditions required healing techniques that conventional doctors would consider impossible or fraudulent, depending on their perspective regarding unexplained medical phenomena. The electromagnetic shielding that Elena designed around the facility prevented supernatural energy signatures from being detected by government monitoring systems, while creating safe spaces where vampires could undergo procedures during daylight hours, and werewolves could receive treatment during transformation cycles that made conventional medical intervention dangerous for both patient and medical staff. Maya's hybrid abilities allowed her to perform surgeries that combined precision beyond human capability with healing techniques that accelerated recovery in ways that should have taken weeks or months, according to established medical understanding of tissue regeneration and cellular repair mechanisms. The first major test of Maya's revolutionary approach came when Kieran brought her a young vampire whose feeding accident had resulted in massive internal injuries that conventional vampire healing couldn't address without access to significant quantities of human blood that would require multiple victims and potentially expose their community to investigation. Maya's examination revealed damage that would have been fatal to any human patient, but her hybrid perspective allowed her to see how vampire physiology could be guided through accelerated healing if the proper energy channels were established and maintained throughout the surgical procedure. The operation required Maya to channel her own life force into the patient while simultaneously performing microsurgery that repaired cellular damage at levels invisible to normal medical instruments, her enhanced senses allowing her to monitor biological processes that occurred too quickly for conventional observation and measurement. Victor's trial for betraying Kieran's trust and endangering Maya's existence took place in the same cathedral where supernatural leaders had gathered to witness her trial by combat, ancient vampire law requiring formal judgment for treachery that violated the blood bonds holding their society together through mutual loyalty and shared consequences. Maya's testimony in Victor's defense surprised everyone present, her medical ethics compelling her to advocate for rehabilitation rather than execution, despite understanding that his betrayal had nearly resulted in her death and the exposure of supernatural society to human investigation. She argued that Victor's actions stemmed from fear rather than malice, centuries of faithful service corrupted by panic at changes he couldn't understand or control, and that destroying him would waste accumulated knowledge and experience that could be redirected toward supporting the integration she was working to achieve between human and immortal communities. The council member whose child Maya saved had initially approached her facility with skepticism, bordering on hostility, centuries of vampire supremacist thinking, making it difficult to accept that hybrid medicine could address conditions that pure-blood vampire healing had been unable to resolve through traditional methods. The young vampire's condition involved a rare genetic disorder that affected the supernatural healing mechanisms that normally made their kind nearly immortal, her deteriorating physiology threatening to reduce her to the weakened state that characterized vampires who had lost their connection to the mystical forces that sustained their immortal existence. Maya's treatment required her to literally reprogram the child's supernatural healing responses using a combination of medical intervention and hybrid energy manipulation that took 3 days of continuous work and left Maya physically and psychically exhausted from the effort required to maintain the delicate balance between human medicine and vampire mysticism. The successful treatment marked a turning point in supernatural politics as word spread through immortal communities about healing techniques that could address conditions previously considered incurable or fatal. Maya's hybrid nature, allowing her to bridge gaps between species that had maintained separate medical traditions for millennia. Werewolf pack leaders began bringing injured shapeshifters, whose transformation injuries had left them trapped between human and wolf forms, while witch covens requested consultations for practitioners whose magical experiments had resulted in supernatural afflictions that defied traditional remedies. Maya's patient roster expanded to include beings she had never imagined existed, from ancient forest spirits whose connection to nature had been damaged by human environmental destruction to urban demons whose adaptation to modern city life had created new forms of psychological trauma that required innovative therapeutic approaches. Kieran's collaboration with Maya in developing protocols for human supernatural medical cooperation revealed aspects of his character that 8 centuries of political leadership had taught him to conceal from all but his closest advisors. His genuine concern for the welfare of supernatural communities, extending beyond territorial protection to include quality of life improvements that traditional vampire society had never prioritized. Their working relationship evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect and complementary skills, Maya's medical expertise and compassionate instincts balancing Kieran's strategic thinking and accumulated knowledge of supernatural politics and history. Together, they created frameworks for cooperation that could expand beyond medical applications to include other areas where human innovation and supernatural abilities might combine to benefit both communities, without compromising the secrecy that protected immortal societies from persecution or exploitation. The kidney's complete integration into Maya's physiology marked the final stage of her transformation from human surgeon to hybrid healer. Her supernatural abilities now fully developed, but tempered by the medical ethics and compassionate instincts that had defined her character before the transplant, that changed everything. Maya discovered that her hybrid nature allowed her to retain the analytical thinking and emotional connections that made her effective at treating human patients while gaining the enhanced senses and energy manipulation capabilities that made supernatural medicine possible in ways that pure-blood vampires couldn't achieve, without external blood sources or mystical amplification. Her reflection now appeared consistently in mirrors, but showed subtle differences from her original human appearance: golden highlights in her eyes and a luminous quality to her skin that suggested the supernatural energies flowing through her. Enhanced physiology. Sarah's adaptation to supernatural medicine proved that human medical professionals could learn to work with immortal patients given proper training and protective protocols, her scientific background providing frameworks for understanding phenomena that initially seemed to violate natural law, but actually represented extensions of biological processes operating according to principles that conventional medical education had never explored. Elena's security measures had prevented any significant breaches of supernatural secrecy, despite the increased activity around Maya's facility. Her expertise in electronic surveillance and data protection proving invaluable for maintaining the careful balance between providing medical services and avoiding attention from government agencies equipped to investigate unusual patterns of energy usage or patient demographics. The supernatural plague emerged without warning as a mystical contagion that affected both human and vampire populations simultaneously, its symptoms manifesting differently in each species, but following progression patterns that suggested artificial origin rather than natural disease evolution. Human victims experienced rapid deterioration of their immune systems that left them vulnerable to opportunistic infections, while vampires found their supernatural healing abilities systematically failing until they resembled the weakened undead of popular fiction rather than the powerful immortal beings they had been before infection. Maya's examination of plague samples revealed a sophisticated biological weapon designed specifically to target the mystical energies that sustained supernatural physiology, while simultaneously attacking the genetic markers that made certain humans susceptible to vampire transformation. Its creator clearly possessing knowledge of both modern biotechnology and ancient supernatural biology. Maya's unique hybrid biology made her immune to the plague's effects, while simultaneously allowing her to synthesize antibodies that could potentially provide cure or prevention for both human and vampire victims. But the process would require her to sacrifice significant portions of her supernatural abilities to generate enough neutralizing agents to treat entire populations. The medical analysis revealed that creating an effective cure would permanently reduce her hybrid capabilities by approximately 70%, leaving her with enhanced healing and diagnostic abilities, but eliminating the energy manipulation and rapid regeneration that made her unique among supernatural beings. Kieran's immediate response was to volunteer for the procedure himself, offering to sacrifice his own immortal essence to preserve Maya's abilities, even though doing so would reduce him to something approaching mortal vulnerability for the first time in 8 centuries. Maya's choice to accept the personal cost of synthesizing the cure reflected the medical ethics that had guided her decisions since beginning her transformation, her commitment to saving lives taking precedence over personal considerations about power or supernatural status. The procedure required her to channel her hybrid energies into creating biological templates that could be replicated using conventional medical technology, essentially teaching her own immune system to mass produce antibodies that could protect both human and vampire populations from the plague's continuing effects. Kieran worked alongside her throughout the 3-day process, his ancient knowledge of vampire physiology helping to optimize the synthesis, while his emotional support sustained her through the physical and psychic trauma of voluntarily diminishing her supernatural capabilities. The successful creation of the cure marked another transformation in Maya's existence, reducing her hybrid abilities to levels that still exceeded normal human capacity, but no longer approached the godlike powers she had possessed at the peak of her supernatural development. Maya retained enough enhanced healing to continue her unique medical practice and sufficient diagnostic abilities to see supernatural conditions that conventional doctors would miss. But the energy manipulation capabilities that had allowed her to perform miraculous healings were permanently reduced to more sustainable levels. The plague's defeat through Maya's sacrifice earned her recognition throughout supernatural society as someone whose commitment to healing transcended species boundaries and personal ambition, her willingness to diminish her own power for the greater good, establishing precedents for cooperation between immortal communities that had maintained separate existences for millennia. Kieran's partnership with Maya deepened into a relationship built on mutual sacrifice and shared commitment to bridging the gap between human and supernatural societies, their collaboration representing evolution in vampire leadership that prioritized cooperation over domination and healing over predation. The ancient vampire's 8 centuries of accumulated wisdom, combined with Maya's innovative medical approaches to create new possibilities for supernatural society that neither could have achieved independently, their working relationship demonstrating that hybrid thinking could benefit immortal communities without compromising the essential characteristics that made vampire existence meaningful and sustainable. Maya's reduced but still significant supernatural abilities allowed her to continue developing medical techniques that served both human and immortal patients, while maintaining the energy reserves necessary for normal life and emotional connections that kept her grounded in the humanitarian principles that had motivated her original choice to become a doctor. 6 months after the supernatural plague crisis that had transformed Maya's hybrid abilities into something more sustainable but equally revolutionary, the integrated medical facility stood as testament to possibilities that most beings had never imagined could exist within their segregated worlds. The converted hospital complex now housed the most advanced supernatural medical center on the continent, its gleaming corridors filled with a mixture of human medical professionals and immortal beings who had learned to work together under Maya's guidance with efficiency that defied centuries of mutual suspicion and territorial thinking. Former enemies found themselves collaborating on cases that challenged every assumption about species limitations and healing potential, vampire lords consulting with werewolf shamans about mystical injuries, while human doctors learned to recognize supernatural conditions that conventional medical education had never addressed or acknowledged as possible within their understanding of biological systems and recovery processes. Sarah Kim moved through the facility's administrative offices with confidence born of 6 months spent learning to manage medical teams that included beings whose lifespans measured in centuries rather than decades, her human perspective proving invaluable for developing protocols that could bridge the gap between immortal patients and mortal urgency in ways that served both communities effectively. Elena Vasquez had transformed the facility's security systems into something unprecedented in supernatural history. Protective measures that could simultaneously shield vampire patients from sunlight exposure and werewolf patients from lunar influence, while maintaining absolute confidentiality for human patients whose conditions required treatments that government agencies would classify as impossible or fraudulent, depending on their level of awareness regarding non-human medical capabilities. The transformation of vampire society under Kieran's restructured leadership represented evolution that many ancient beings had thought impossible, after millennia of hierarchical traditions that prioritized individual power over collective advancement. But Maya's example of healing over conflict had demonstrated alternatives to dominance-based relationships that could strengthen immortal communities, rather than weakening them through internal competition. Vampire houses that had maintained separate territories for centuries began collaborating on projects that required resources and expertise beyond what any single clan could provide independently, their cooperation facilitated by medical protocols that Maya had developed for treating supernatural injuries and diseases that affected multiple species simultaneously. The medical community's speechless amazement reached its peak during a procedure that Maya performed on 8-year-old Tommy Rodriguez, a human child whose leukemia had progressed beyond the capabilities of conventional chemotherapy and radiation treatments to arrest or reverse its devastating effects on his developing immune system. Maya's revolutionary approach involved temporarily integrating vampire regeneration techniques with human cellular biology, using her hybrid abilities to guide the child's natural healing processes through enhanced pathways that could eliminate cancerous cells while strengthening healthy tissue in ways that conventional medicine could never achieve without causing fatal complications from treatment toxicity. The surgical team watched in fascination as Maya channeled carefully controlled amounts of supernatural energy into Tommy's circulatory system. Her enhanced senses monitoring cellular changes at microscopic levels, while her medical knowledge guided the process according to principles that combined cutting-edge human science with mystical healing traditions that most doctors had dismissed as primitive superstition. The procedure required Maya to maintain precise energy balance for over 6 hours of continuous surgical intervention. Her hybrid physiology, allowing her to sustain the complex biological manipulation while simultaneously performing microsurgery that conventional instruments couldn't accomplish with sufficient precision and speed. Tommy's recovery proceeded at rates that medical literature considered impossible, his immune system rebuilding itself with efficiency that suggested fundamental changes to his genetic structure while maintaining his essential human nature and normal developmental patterns. The medical team's documentation of the procedure would eventually revolutionize pediatric oncology, though the supernatural elements would be carefully edited to present the results as breakthrough applications of experimental cellular therapy, rather than mystical healing that operated according to principles beyond current scientific understanding. Maya's return to Metro General Hospital occurred exactly 1 year after the kidney transplant that had transformed her existence from conventional human surgeon to hybrid healer, whose abilities bridged worlds that had remained separate throughout recorded history. She walked through the familiar corridors with perspective that encompassed both her memories as Dr. Maya Chen and her current identity as something unprecedented in supernatural society, her enhanced senses detecting the same electrical rhythms and emotional resonances that had overwhelmed her during the early stages of her transformation. But now those sensations provided useful diagnostic information, rather than chaotic overload. Her hybrid abilities integrated with her medical training to create capabilities that served healing rather than simply existing as supernatural anomalies that defied classification or control. The emergency call that brought her back to her old workplace involved a patient whose condition represented the inverse of her own transformation, an ancient vampire whose supernatural physiology had been damaged by mystical toxins that required human organ transplantation to prevent complete dissolution of his immortal essence. Count Alessandro Torriani had survived over 4 centuries by adapting his feeding habits to modern urban life, but exposure to alchemical weapons during a territorial dispute had compromised his supernatural healing abilities to the point where traditional vampire medicine could no longer sustain his existence. Maya's examination revealed systematic damage to his mystical energy channels that could only be repaired through integration with human biological systems that possessed the adaptability and regenerative potential that his compromised vampire physiology had lost through centuries of accumulated mystical trauma. The human-to-vampire transplant procedure represented the mirror image of Maya's own transformation, carefully planned medical intervention designed to create controlled hybridization rather than accidental evolution that could have resulted in catastrophic complications or supernatural exposure. Maya's surgical team included both human specialists and vampire healers whose combined expertise allowed them to monitor biological and mystical changes simultaneously, their collaboration demonstrating the integration of medical traditions that her facility had spent months developing through experimental procedures and theoretical research. Count Torriani's successful transformation into a stable human-vampire hybrid proved that Maya's methods could be replicated with careful planning and proper medical support, opening possibilities for therapeutic hybridization that could benefit both species in ways that pure-blood supremacists had never considered or attempted to explore. The formal merger of supernatural and human medical communities occurred through ceremonial procedures that satisfied both legal requirements and mystical traditions, creating institutional frameworks that could support continued cooperation while maintaining the secrecy that protected immortal societies from persecution or exploitation by government agencies seeking to weaponize supernatural abilities. Maya's leadership of the combined medical establishment represented unprecedented authority for someone who had existed as a hybrid for less than 2 years. But her demonstrated competence and commitment to healing over politics had earned respect from ancient beings whose support was essential for maintaining the delicate balance between progress and tradition. Maya and Kieran's evening conversations on the hospital roof had become routine that provided both of them with perspective on the changes they had facilitated in their respective communities. Their partnership representing evolution in supernatural leadership that prioritized cooperation over domination while maintaining the essential characteristics that made immortal existence meaningful rather than simply extended mortal life. The ancient vampire's 8 centuries of accumulated wisdom, combined with Maya's innovative medical approaches to create synergies that neither could have achieved independently, their collaboration demonstrating that hybrid thinking could strengthen supernatural society without compromising the traditions and relationships that had sustained immortal communities through millennia of careful concealment from human authorities. The revelation about Maya's original kidney failure came through Kieran's investigation into the mystical toxin that had damaged Count Torriani's supernatural healing abilities, ancient alchemical formulations that had been designed specifically to target individuals with latent supernatural sensitivity and prepare them for transformation under controlled circumstances. Maya's medical records from before her collapse revealed exposure patterns that suggested deliberate poisoning rather than random organ failure, her selection as a transplant recipient representing the culmination of plans that had been developing for months before her dramatic transformation in the operating room. The supernatural community had been watching her long before she became aware of their existence. Her medical skills and compassionate instincts marking her as potentially valuable for bridging the gap between human and immortal societies in ways that pure-blood vampires could never attempt without compromising their essential nature. The discovery that her transformation had been orchestrated rather than accidental initially filled Maya with anger at the manipulation that had cost her normal human existence. But reflection revealed that the results had aligned perfectly with her deepest values and professional ambitions in ways that random chance could never have achieved. Her hybrid abilities had allowed her to save lives and develop medical techniques that benefited both human and supernatural communities. Her unique position, enabling cooperation between species that had maintained hostile or suspicious relationships for centuries. The kidney transplant that had seemed like medical emergency had actually represented destiny, fulfilling itself through carefully planned intervention that respected her agency while guiding her toward purposes that conventional human medicine could never have accomplished. The final scene found Maya and Kieran watching sunset from the hospital roof, two beings whose connection had transcended the biological bond created by shared organs to become partnership based on mutual respect and complementary abilities that strengthened both supernatural and human communities. Maya's journey from human surgeon to hybrid healer had revealed possibilities for cooperation and integration that challenged fundamental assumptions about species limitations and territorial thinking, her example inspiring others to seek alternatives to conflict and dominance as organizing principles for immortal society. Kieran's evolution from isolated vampire lord to collaborative leader had demonstrated that ancient beings could adapt to changing circumstances without losing the essential characteristics that made their existence meaningful and sustainable across centuries of accumulated experience and wisdom. The emergency call that interrupted their contemplation involved another impossible case that would test Maya's hybrid abilities and challenge her understanding of supernatural medicine, a patient whose condition combined elements from multiple species in ways that conventional treatment protocols could never address effectively. Maya's response to the call reflected the confidence and competence that 18 months of revolutionary medical practice had developed in her character. Her hybrid nature now fully integrated with her professional identity and personal values in ways that made her uniquely qualified to handle cases that would leave other medical professionals speechless with amazement or disbelief. The story concluded with Maya heading back into the hospital to face new challenges that would continue expanding the boundaries of what medical science considered possible. Her partnership with Kieran and collaboration with supernatural communities, providing foundations for adventures that would further revolutionize the relationship between human and immortal societies, through healing techniques that transcended traditional limitations and created possibilities that no one had expected could exist within their segregated worlds.